Ladies and gentlemen, it has happened. In one of the least surprising twists in the history of Australian politics, Barnaby Joyce has now officially joined One Nation. Let's do a quick revision here for anybody who has been lucky enough to not been thinking about Barnaby Joyce over the last couple of months. Barnaby, basically, according to his timeline of events, was pretty much like forced into permanent backbench status by not only the National Party itself, but also by allegedly Peter Dutton, who really didn't want him to be a part of the campaign at all, basically said, stay in Tamworth, don't do anything, we don't want you public, and then the Nationals on top of that, of course, relegating him to the backbench with no real leadership ambitions or positions for him at all. And he did not take that particularly well. The first thing that Barnaby announced was that he would not be running for re-election in the division of New England, which he has held for upwards of a decade now, that he would be stepping down. Some people interpreted that as, oh, he'll be retiring, but a lot more people thought, okay, that means he's going to be running for the Senate in the 2028 election and will be stepping down from his seat. And then a little bit after that, when he announced he wouldn't be running in New England again, he just flat out announced that he was resigning from the Nationals as a whole and was sitting as an independent MP in the House of Representatives. But it was very clear from a lot of coverage that he was spending an inordinate amount of time with Pauline Hanson in very well publicised dinners, and Pauline was actively calling in the media for Barnaby to come over to One Nation. So there was quite a bit of speculation, particularly because Barnaby himself was not ruling out the move to Pauline Hanson's One Nation. So what happened today? Well, basically everything that we assumed was going to happen happened today. Barnaby today officially announced that he was joining One Nation and will sit in the lower house as their one MP. I believe he's the first member of the lower house from One Nation since Pauline herself created her party back in the 1990s. And then, really to no one's shock at all, Joyce also confirmed what we were all suspecting, which is that he is going to lead One Nation's Senate ticket in New South Wales at the next election. And I think the real takeaway from all of this is that Barnaby, I think, and I mentioned this in the last video where I was talking about his resignation from the Nats to become an independent, is that Barnaby has quite a skill when it comes to knowing how to put himself first at the expense of others. So, look, I am not at all a supporter of One Nation, and I really hope that they don't perform as well as the polling is currently suggesting. But it's very clear that for Barnaby personally, this is a very good move. I agree with the assessment that he kind of put out there that the Nationals were kind of railroading him, that they were trying to get him to just be some quiet backbencher without any higher up role in cabinet potentially if they ever got back into government. He was kind of just written off and put into a corner by both parties in the coalition. So I think that for Barnaby himself, doing this is probably the best move he could have made for his career. I don't think it's a particularly good situation morally, but I can't question the politics behind it because Barnaby is taking advantage of a situation that we haven't seen in this country since World War II, and that is the complete fracturing and collapse of right-wing politics in Australia. Because, look, with the coalition in as dire of a situation as it currently is, potentially polling as low as 24%, and with One Nation rising like we have never seen before, it makes sense that some people in politics are going to take advantage of that to boost their own political careers. And I don't think anyone is doing it more visibly or more just directly than Barnaby himself. And jumping ship like this just makes sense. Because I think a lot of people were waiting for the moment when it became clear that One Nation might start to overtake the coalition in terms of primary vote in this country. And I think a move like this might potentially do that. If Barnaby Joyce is able to show, hey, if you are a conservative-minded voter and you've always supported the coalition, but you think that they're just kind of dead in the water, then look, I am giving legitimacy to any voter in this country who traditionally lines up with the coalition to come over to One Nation. And it may sound ridiculous saying that Barnaby Joyce gives legitimacy to anything, but you have to remember this man was Deputy Prime Minister of this country, and he does have quite a decent amount of support, particularly in rural Australia and amongst the National Party grassroots movement. And also looking at why this particularly is going to be so successful is that Barnaby is not running in the lower house again at the 2020 election. He is running in the Senate, which, as we all know, is a proportional chamber. And I think with Barnaby's face there, running the One Nation ticket in New South Wales, there's no telling how much that could gut the coalition of its core conservative support when you have a figure like Barnaby that is so well known and considered like such a classic figure of the Australian right, particularly the most conservative corner of it. There's no really telling how much that's going to harm the coalition in terms of its Senate vote in 2028. But could this blow up in their faces? Could this all go wrong? Well, of course, there is the potential for some ego clash. I will say, though, that Barnaby and Hanson have known each other for a very long time, and they seem at least to be incredibly friendly. There is a massive amount of policy overlap between the two, but that being said, we've seen what has happened in the past when Pauline has recruited high-profile federal politicians to her cause, people like Mark Latham, and that hasn't exactly ended in her favour. So, I mean, looking at the history of it all, I would not be surprised if there was an ego clash, but I wouldn't expect it either. I mean, Joyce, being the politician that he is, knowing how the game works, I think he understands that his connection with Pauline and her reputation is very much going to keep him in politics doing what he wants to do, and that is be the centre of attention and buck and beat the coalition after what they, or at least what he perceives as being this massive wrong that they have done to him by relegating him to the backbenches for eternity. I think the main takeaway from this, and why this matters, or why I think it matters, is One Nation, at least in terms of the polling, is in the best position it has ever been at in its history. And now they have a former deputy prime minister of this country, someone who has a massive media profile, is very well known in Australian politics, in Barnaby Joyce, arguing their case, not just on the floor of Parliament, where One Nation now has representation in both chambers, but I assume that Barnaby Joyce is going to be a megaphone for One Nation between now and the 2028 election on every single channel in this country. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to break the floodgates and suddenly we're going to see One Nation overtaking the coalition, but I do think we should pay a close attention to polling going ahead, because if there were any conservative, really hard-right voters who were still supporting the coalition but were looking for any reason to maybe jump over to One Nation, one of their leading spokespeople, Barnaby Joyce, jumping over might have just given them a reason to do so. Thank you guys for listening to that. I just wanted to attach a little extra segment to the end of it all, and that is just a thank you to you guys for 40,000 subscribers, which is kind of unbelievable. I did not think we would make it this far. I didn't think we were going to make it to 20 or 30, but lo and behold, here we are at 40. And that is unbelievable. I owe you guys quite a lot. I owe one of you guys, very specifically, a video now on the politics of Warhammer 40k as part of a running joke that has been going on for a while now, which I promise is on the way. But on top of that, just thank you guys for constantly coming back, constantly commenting, being a part of this channel, helping it grow. I really can't put into words how much I appreciate the continued support that I'm constantly getting here, but it means a lot to me, and I hope that I can see most of you guys if, who knows, maybe when we do hit 50. Hopefully I will see you guys there.